Chapter 14. When Theo had returned to Oxford, he decided not to tell anyone about their fight in Bradford. He definitely hadn't wanted to tell Vanessa, but she'd noticed his chipped tooth, which left him little choice but to tell her something. So he'd told her that a fight had started between two drunkards and he, acting as Sir Galahad, had intervened. But Vanessa seemed to have a sixth sense, which was the only explanation Theo could find for why she had started nagging him so much. Sometimes it was about the way he spoke to other women, sometimes it was about his football, at other times it was his social life. She had told him that his Nigerian friends made her feel excluded, but he wondered how she could possibly feel excluded in her own country. She complained that she and Theo didn't spend enough time together, yet, he wondered, if she'd really wanted to spend time with him, why hadn't she wanted to come to this wedding? Yes, she would be coming to join him later, but that wasn't the point. Morning, someone said, drawing Theo from his thoughts as he sat awaiting the arrival of the bride. Good morning. Theo smiled at the young woman who sat next to him in the pew. He was about to introduce himself properly when she turned to face their altar and made a sign of the cross. She then knelt on a prayer cushion in such a way that her skirt rose above the back of her knees, revealing a shapely pair of legs. Theo closed his eyes and listened for some moments to the organ music, thinking that maybe he ought to pray too, but her legs were distracting him. He looked instead at the altar and the sanctuary where the choir boys sat behind their lectern, looking angelic in their white robes and ruffed collars. The church was otherwise dark and musty until an unexpected ray of sun light pierced the stained glass windows. Theo smiled to himself, thinking of the sunshine coming all the way from the groom's home in Cano and bursting through the English clouds to make a guest appearance in Finchley, Northland, for today's service. Unfortunately, this sun was a frustrating winter one, bringing plenty of light but no heat. Theo looked at the woman next to him and contemplated conversation, but the organ music stopped and everyone's eyes turned towards the back of the church. They all stared in anticipation, but the organist had not stopped to signal anything in particular and soon resumed another piece. As Theo listened, he felt a sense of relief and awe, relief because it was not him having to take the vows, and awe at the solemnity of such occasions. He reflected that this wedding was the most surprising of any he had attended, and he surmised that the bride must have fallen pregnant. This at least would explain the speed of arranging it, but there was no one to confirm his hypothesis. Tund was not around, and the only other person to ask was Yusuf himself, who now stood at the front of the church smiling broadly. Theo stared at the groom, looking for signs of nervousness. There were no obvious indicators, but Theo knew that beneath the smiles Yusuf was anxious. Sitting in the congregation on the bridegroom's side were many of Yusuf's Bradford friends, and on the bride's side were women dressed in the traditional Nigerian wedding lace. It surprised Theo to second that Joyce had so many Nigerian guests seated though, when he would have expected English people. A hush then fell across the congregation and everyone turned again to face the back of the church. This time the veiled bride appeared like an angel beneath the arch of the church doors. Theo looked again, squinting to make sure he wasn't seeing things. The bride was black. He glanced at the service sheet and reread the names, Yusuf Buba, Carr and Joy Williams. Joy, not Joyce. Theo looked around to see if anyone else was shocked, but nothing showed on people's faces. Who was this Joy? Williams was not a typical Nigerian name, but this was less puzzling to Teo than the fact. He couldn't recall meeting anyone named Joy when he was in Bradford, just a few months ago, and yet Yusuf was smiling broadly as though he had been planning this day for years. Vows were taken, rings exchanged, and nobody stood up to give reason or just impediment why the two should not be joined together in holy matrimony. And so it was that Yusuf, the ladies' man, became a married man. The organ started its wedding march and the happy couple walked down the aisle followed by the congregation. Outside, people threw confetti as the church bells rang out. Teo stood watching, amused by the cameraman who dashed about trying to capture each joyful expression, and for a moment he could have been back in Nigeria. He had missed this, the fancy ways women tied their jellies, and the starchy rustle of wrappers and agbadas. He had also missed the smiles, the loud imperious voices, and perspiration. Of course, now that the sun was out, the reception would start late, but it was bound to have started late anyway. He wondered what their reception would be like, remembering the chaos of those back home where he and his brothers would compete to maneuver their way into the VIP queue. He was laughing to himself at his childhood antics when someone tapped him on the shoulder. Vanessa. There she was, dressed in the fine lace wrapper and bubba that they had borrowed from a friend in Cowley. The pale blue material with its silver thread sparkled against her skin and drew attention to her smiling eyes. Then it dawned on him that he was in trouble. How was he going to tell Vanessa that the bride was not Joyce, but Joy? And especially after all that he had been saying about how common it was for Nigerians to marry Europeans. He wouldn't be able to blame his mistake on the fact that he didn't know Yusuf that well either, because Vanessa was under the impression that Yusuf was a close friend. That had been his line for being so upset over her decision to skip the service. There was no other way then but to tell Vanessa that he had made a mistake. What? Vanessa exclaimed. I know, I can't believe it myself, but I must have misread the invitation. I thought it was Joyce, but it's Joy. So maybe the relationship with Joyce wasn't so serious after all. Not serious. But Joyce was his girlfriend. Oh 9. SHH, please, he begged, aware of how close they stood to the bride's family. He could half that the band had started up in the church hall, and he would take her to the reception where they could talk in private. Men dressed in brill_Lee and white agbadas waved them into a noisy room smelling of fried rice. Heaters turned to maximum and glowing orange made the hall feel too hot, even. You 100K beautiful, Teo whispered as they found their way to a table. For Teo. Come. He took Vanessa's arm. You should have seen people in the church. Lots of people looked shocked when Joy came in. We're bound to find out what. Vanessa said nothing, but by now the bride and groom had arrived and P.O. had started showering the couple with pound notes. It's a tradition, Teo explained, to bless the couple by placing money on the bride and groom. Come, let's make our contribution. He stretched his hands through the huddle of well-wishers and tucked £2 notes into Joy's head tie that had become so laden with notes that a few fluttered to there. Congratulations, old chap. Teo patted Yusuf on the shoulder. Now, Floor. You finally met the woman I've been telling you about, my Yoruba queen. What woman? But of course he couldn't say this in front of the bride. Yusuf beamed. Instead he nodded enthusiastically and greeted the married couple. It's very odd, Teo whispered to Vanessa. What were you saying to the bride? I was wishing her the best from us, a happy and blessed marriage. Ira carry. Oh, literally translated, means, may the blessings of this joyful occasion be spread among your still unmarried friends. He slipped his hand beneath the tablecloth and tried running his fingers down Vanessa's skirt, but she stopped him with an angry movement. Gosh, he said, surprised by her reaction, but others had joined their table. So nothing more was said. Food was served, jollof, amala, goat stew, egusi, and many more dishes that Vanessa would normally have asked Teo about, but she had her back turned, chatting to others. He did the same and then later pretended to be listening to the speakers while mulling over the meaning of her silence. He had expected her to be surprised by the new bride and maybe a little cross with him for making the mistake, but not angry, not this angry. What's wrong, Vanessa? He whispered, trying to cajole her out of her silence, but she wouldn't be drawn, so that when the orations eventually ended and the dancing began, Teo didn't bother to ask her to join him. He didn't feel like dancing on his own, but he would be damned if he was just going to sit there and not at least appear to be enjoying the music. A part of him considered asking the pretty woman who had sat next to him in church, but he couldn't. No matter how annoyed he was with Vanessa, he would never do something like that. He moved closer to Vanessa and let his arms swing loosely as he sang along to the words of Sunny Aid, but even this did not bring a smile to her face. She wasn't even looking at him. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the far end of the room. A woman was angrily flinging plates off a table, and Teo 9's heart sank when he looked over and saw Joyce lurching towards the newlyweds. Their band stopped playing. You bastard! Bastard! She screamed, flailing her arms as others attempted to restrain her. For a few minutes everyone stood in shock until someone led her out of the hall. Now drink, drink, people muttered, but they knew it was not simply drink. Vanessa and Teo shared a stuffy railway carriage back to Oxford, just the two of them, he sitting on one side, and she on the other, silent. Teo tried to start a conversation by joking about Nigerian weddings and the drama that Carney with them, but Vanessa wouldn't be moved. And that crazy woman, Teo added, in a final attempt to coax Vanessa into talking. Really, he felt sorry for Joyce and ashamed of the way he had avoided her, but he couldn't have risked anything more going wrong in front of Vanessa. Things were bad enough already. Vanessa, you've been silent all afternoon. Surely it's not just because of their wedding? I'm fine, she answered coldly. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Teo watched as she continued to stare out of the window, occasionally combing her hair with her fingers. Of course something's wrong. Well, why don't you tell me then, Teo? She said, turning to glare at him. Tell you what? Tell me why you lied. Lied? Well, let's start with Christine, shall we? Christine? Yes, Christine. Your old lover, the one you were supposed to be related to. Remember? I'm not stupid, Teo. Charlie told me a long time ago that you two were lovers, but I never believed him, and now it's so bloody obvious. You and all your bloody Nigerian friends just use white women, don't you? And you choose to listen to Charlie? Are you in love with him or some thing? Oh, for Christ's sake, stop trying to turn this into something else. Do you really think I couldn't work out who that poor woman was? You use us and then dump AIS for black women when you want to get Married. Well, you obviously don't understand me or my culture. Oh, so it's culture again, is it? Bloody culture. She shouted. What a nice little excuse. And what do you call me dressing up like this in your Nigerian costume? Don't you think I'm trying to adjust, to show you that I can fit in? Is that supposed to impress me? He said, ignoring the fact it had. And it's not a costume, it's our national dress. Fine. National dress. Attire. Call it whatever the hell you want. Happy. Now? Ready to tell me the truth? Or is this also cultural? Perhaps you don't call. It's lying in your culture. You think that's funny? No, as a matter of fact, I don't think lying is funny. Vanessa, how many times do I have to tell you that I don't know what happened between Yusuf and Joyce? I really didn't know her well, and perhaps this marriage was arranged and you? She cut him short. What happened between you and Chris? Nothing. Nothing. How the hell can you say that? For goodness sakes, Vanessa, the woman's dead. Can't you show some respect, for once? And all this swearing. Show some respect. What's that supposed to mean? You lied to me, Teo. You told me you were related to her. Why don't you try a little respect? Vanessa, someone's going to stop the train because of the way you're shouting. Let them. I don't care. Tears were now streaming down Vanessa's face. Vanessa, please don't cry. I love you, Vanessa. I don't care about nationality, race or whatever, all of that means nothing to me. He moved to sit next to her and tried to hug her, but she wouldn't let him. After a while, though, he was able to draw her close, and eventually she grew calm and stopped crying. More Ameh, he whispered, blowing at the little bits of confetti that refused to be dislodged from her hair. No. She burst into tears again. Don't Moranzi me. Stop bloody trying to turn me into a Nigerian. Fine. He let go of her waist and pushed her away. Forget this, he shouted, stood up and left, slamming the carriage door behind him.